Welcome to our second Lunch and Learn session. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Kulin Nation as custodians of the land that we are operating on. Each week in these sessions, we'll be talking to a different on-the-ground specialist, and today we have Luke Host, Ecologic's Program Implementation Manager, who'll be talking to Reid Beecham, who is the Sustainability Manager on Childs Road Upgrade Project, and that's about implementing the Recycled First policy. The session will run for 30 minutes with 10 minutes for questions at the end. So pop any of your questions into the chat and we'll address those in this section at the end. We're going to record this session. We'll upload it onto the Knowledge Hub on Monday, so you'll be able to access it there. If you need access, you can email us at ecologic@roadprojects.vic.gov.au, and that address will come up at the end. I think we'll jump straight into the session. So welcome to Reid and Luke.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. Yes, just to introduce myself, excuse me, I am the Project Implementation Manager at Ecologic. So I work quite closely with contractors and project teams, supporting them in getting more recycled and reused materials into their projects. And a part of that is helping to roll out the Recycled First policy. So we're here today to have a bit of a chat with Reid about that and how that policy is being rolled out onto one project in particular. So Reid, thanks very much for joining us and taking some time out of your Friday. Maybe we can kick off with just you expanding a little bit more on your role and the project that we're talking about here and your involvement in that project.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm Reid Beecham. I'm the Sustainability Manager for ACE Contractors, and we're delivering the Childs Road upgrade for MRPV. So ultimately, I'm there as a resource in the team to work to meet the sustainability requirements of the project. But inherently, there's a really strong focus on reducing materials impacts to embodied impacts from materials, reducing energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and trying to keep resources out of the landfill. So there's a pretty natural alignment with the Recycled First policy, just inherently within the role that I'm playing within the project. And then a little about the project too.
If you can talk a little bit about about the Childs Road project, a little bit about the scope of the project and what it's made up of, that'd be great.
So it's a road duplication project. So it's in Mill Park, just in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. Ultimately, it's there to try and improve the traffic flow and create a east to west link in the area and make it a bit safer and more accessible. But the actual scope, so there's about 750 meters of road duplication on each side, with a new bridge running over Darebin Creek, and a strengthening of the existing bridge. There's some intersection upgrades, a shared user path, both east and westbound, a safety barrier. There's some street lighting, drainage with swales, some landscaping and urban design elements as well. So we mobilized on the project a bit earlier this year, starting the development phase about a year ago. And we'll be continuing construction through next year.
Cool. Thanks very much for that. I guess it kind of leads into my next question, which is a little bit about the Recycled First process. So you kind of touched on where the project's at. For those that don't know, the Childs Road project was one of the very first to implement the policy, one of the first four, in fact. So I guess one of the most advanced projects in terms of the implementation of the policy. Just for those that don't know, just I guess a quick 101 on the policy. Basically, it is a new policy that sits within the Recycling Victoria policy, and it requires contractors to optimise their use of recycled and reused materials. So obviously working with Reid and the team in trying to achieve that goal on Childs Road. So Reid, I'm keen to hear your thoughts around how did you find the Recycled First process and it being implemented onto your project, especially given you were one of the first cabs off the rank?
Yeah, a big question. And it was something that I was pretty excited about. And because we were the first out of the gate, there was an inherent, focus from the client. So with MRPV and also just as a project team to figure out, what does this actually look like? Like, what does it mean to optimize, the recycled and reuse content within a project? And specifically, what does it mean for us and for this project? So I guess it all started during the development phase, where we were handed kind of a blank template for the Recycled First plan, and attached with that was, what would be the commitments table for all the initiatives that would kind of make up that plan, and a few key resources that we used to kind of navigate it through. So we had a list of all of the potential opportunities, and we slowly had to navigate through those opportunities and assess them, where we started really with the opportunities that are of the highest impact. So what were we using the most of? What specifically was relevant? Who are the suppliers and where are they located? What are the product specifications? So in early days, we leaned really heavily on, you and Ecologic and MRPV to help navigate through and just collect all of the right resources. So we knew, what are these options and what are the details of them? And then slowly we, worked with all of the key decision makers. So worked closely with the design team, in the engineering team, particularly around the characteristics of those products and the specifications, and then worked closely with, the suppliers and the commercial team to assess what are those commercial barriers, what's the supply chain look like, particularly as we were trying to come up with this list of commitments. So a lot of early and active collaboration with a lot of different parties.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I guess within all of that, so obviously quite a detailed process and a lot of people and things that need to happen along the way. And obviously we can talk a little bit to, how is that in terms of outcomes, what's eventuating now that you're in delivery. But just before we jump into that, keen to understand a little bit more about the sorts of recycled materials and what applications you are working on at the moment. And you did touch a little bit on, working with suppliers and some of those kind of key impact materials. So can you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, of course. And I didn't mention, but during the actual process, we had the intention of coming up with these core commitments a lot earlier than it actually ended up. Then we ended up committing to them. So it took what we thought might be a few months to kind of navigate through all these opportunities, ended up being, until close to the end of the design process, because every opportunity was specific to different scopes of work and different phases of the design development. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, we focus on those really high impact or high volume materials. So naturally that led us to the sub base. So we looked at the road itself. So what's happening under the road, and majority of the sub base for the road is containing recycled content. So that's kind of your, class 2, 3, 4 crushed concrete and CT, but also recycled capping layer. And, we were pretty fortunate in being able to make those commitments just inherently because of where the project is geographically. We are really close to two kind of key suppliers, Alex Fraser and Repurpose It, who are really leading in the way of having a lot of options for recycled products that would meet the specifications. So a lot of our commitments were under the road, and then within the asphalt pavement itself, maximizing the allowable, reclaimed asphalt content. So, we ended up actually tweaking the design to optimize that recycled content. and change some of the pavement types to, include a higher wrap content percentage.
Great.
Yeah, and additionally, so that's kind of the core commitments, but we also, explored some recycled plastic drainage for behind the curb. We looked at some recycled, plastic fibers instead of steel mesh for our shared user path. Some recycled geotextiles and recycled glass for some of the, A2 infill, like drainage infill material. And obviously, trying to just use any Site One materials that are already there, really optimize those as best as we can.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like, a lot of different areas of the project were looked at, with a focus on the priorities around, the bulk impacts, like you said, but not just stopping at the road pavement, looking into different areas as well, which I think the policy and projects in general can really make the most of. There's all sorts of different things that can happen. So I guess you've touched on this a little bit, but my next question was around, why did you select those materials? And just to, I guess, highlight a couple of points you made, you spoke about there's a couple of key suppliers really close to the area, and you also spoke about working with your design team and things like that. So as well as, like the major impacts that, big quantity materials might have. Were there any other kind of factors at play that really led you down the path of selecting certain materials or certain applications?
Yeah, so ultimately, we started with those core commitments because, again, of their, high impact nature. And we also had some separate sustainability targets and performance targets around trying to reduce the embodied impacts of some of the materials selected. So, we figured out which materials were recycled and also were reducing the embodied impacts, and really prioritized those because they, had greater benefits ultimately, kind of across the board. But the big questions were just navigating some of those commercial barriers. So again, these products were all readily available, and from a commercial standpoint, there weren't any major supply risks and major supply challenges. And they also, a lot of these materials have been established and used consistently for a longer time. So some of those natural perceived barriers of what these risks might be from a technical standpoint had more data to back them up, and they felt like less of a risk than something brand new that maybe a designer had never seen or heard of, or there weren't many case studies available to represent them.
I think you touched on a couple of really good points there about the importance of the use of recycled and reused materials being thought about in a broader kind of sustainability context, and reducing carbon, embodied carbon in materials and things like that, which is really, really awesome to see that you guys are thinking about that. Yeah, and I guess the other point around, that there's a number of materials that have a lot of evidence behind them and currently accepted, and there's a good amount of suppliers available to provide them. So I think that's really good to see. And obviously, I think Ecologic as a whole, working towards making more opportunities available to contractors and projects to get more and more things into those projects. So that's really, really good. In terms of, I guess, delivering upon the commitments then, and you mentioned that you still got about another year or so of construction happening, but how have you found the process now of getting some of these into the ground, and actually, delivering upon your commitments? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, I can. So for a lot of the key commitments that we discussed, a lot of the sub pavements, the sub base, we've already, consumed a significant portion of those particular initiatives, just because of the progress of where we are in construction. And, that was working pretty closely with, again, the commercial and the procurement teams to make sure that everybody understands exactly what these commitments were. And also we know what our contingency plans are in case anything changes with that particular supply. And so fortunately, I mean, during the process of developing our Recycled First plan, we had a few different scenarios that we tried to map out of if this happens to fall through, or if circumstances change for any reason, what is an alternative, and we can still maintain that commitment. So fortunately, I mean, a lot of these were, again, well-developed and established supply chains. And so we haven't had any major supply issues from that regard. But I suppose one of the challenges that's come to play is recognizing that some of these products didn't meet the quality standard as the specification had originally outlined. So just navigating through that, and is that, what are the reasons for that, what occurred, and what does that mean for our commitments? And fortunately, these haven't been like major NCRs or major issues, but with any commitments, it was ultimately the big question of assessing risks on the front end to make sure that we had a good plan to continue and actually see these initiatives through, and making sure, again, that everybody's on board and everybody understands, from commercial and procurement teams to all of the engineers on site as well, because of course there are plenty of perspectives and aspects for every opportunity that might fit within this. But yeah, I'll be eager to talk in another year once we see a lot of them continue to come to fruition, and particularly with the impacts of the big build and the Recycled First policy. Since we were one of the first out the gate, what is going to happen to the supply chains for some of these recycled materials, and how is that going to impact, if at all, the commitments that we had made?
Definitely, it's
a big question.
No, it's an exciting space to watch, and certainly we are, and I'm sure others are eager to see how things pan out over the course of the project. I think you touched on a couple of really important points there around having, managing risk and contingency around your commitments. As with all aspects of project delivery, I think is really, really important, and having alternatives if you're unable to achieve something, if you have a supplier issue or whatever it may be. So it's really great to hear that is something that you managed. And I think around the quality issues as well, making sure that, irrespective of virgin or recycled materials or products, quality assurance is very important, and that the right processes are in place. And I think just making sure that they're viewed, irrespective of what the material is, virgin or recycled, that is a critical part in the process. So I guess my next question was, you spoke a little bit about this, but maybe you can expand a bit more around who was involved in the process. You mentioned a little bit about your design and commercial teams, but can you talk a little bit about who was involved and kind of, how that process went working with those different people?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, the question was, who are the key decision makers for each opportunity? So it's identifying the particular, decision maker, whether it's typically it's the designer of that particular package, and working with our own engineers and making sure that they were comfortable with that particular product, and they had all of the product literature and specifications, especially if they're case studies. Those are always really helpful. If it's, again, new to some of these designers, if they've been doing the same thing for a really long time. So design and engineering team, and I would act essentially as the conduit between the supplier, who would be feeding a lot of this information, and the commercial teams and the designer. So yeah, again, every opportunity may have had a different cluster and different team that would be focusing on that initiative. And it was mostly just about trying to keep these things afloat and not just get placed in the too hard box of I don't know enough about that, and you don't know what you don't know, so I'm just gonna sign off on something that I know really well. So it's just making sure that you are giving the right information to the right party at the right time.
Yeah, that's great. I guess what I'm hearing from you is the importance of having the different teams involved, and that they all have kind of a part to play in achieving those outcomes, but also the need for that coordination. And you mentioned you being kind of the conduit, like someone steering the ship and making sure people have what they need, or that you're responding to things. That sounds like it's really critical to getting those commitments locked in and working towards them. So that's really great to see. I guess onto my last question is really a little bit about any challenges and barriers that you faced, and I guess the kind of lessons learned that maybe come off of the back of that, or just more broadly. You did mention at the start the challenges in trying to get your commitments finalised, and I know that that's a challenge across the board. And if there's any other kind of contractors in the room, I'm sure they have the same challenges. So yeah, I guess talking to that a little bit, but any other kind of challenges that you've faced so far?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Confirming commitments, particularly quantities, and kind of knowing where to draw the line within that table, took a lot of time and a lot of work. Ultimately, because each particular material or each opportunity may have been adopted or accepted at different stages through the design development. And so if we're looking at some of the core, sub-base, of course, you may be able to make certain commitments earlier, but what quantity are we comfortable committing to, given that there might be changes to those quantities over time? And particularly, assessing those risks, again, if there are any changes over the course of the project duration, how is that going to impact some of these commitments? And again, what are those contingency plans, and what does that do to the cost benefit that was originally looked at under the supply? So we kind of came up with some risk factors around each opportunity, and adjusted our quantities commitments accordingly. So that was something, again, we maybe naively thought we could finish this plan and establish all of these commitments kind of early on in design, but we're still working through some opportunities. Like it's kind of baked into the core culture at this point of trying to make sure that we're actually optimizing every aspect, and even those materials or opportunities that maybe didn't make their way into the core commitments, not letting them settle and seeing, all right, is now a better time. Maybe we have more information now about a certain product or initiative, or something about the design scope has changed to release the barriers that may have existed before. But yeah, confirming those commitments and confirming those quantities took persistence, and it just took a lot of collaborating early and often with all of the kind of key decision makers, again, those designers and the commercial team. And of course, the suppliers that were paramount in providing information and helping us to overcome some of the barriers that they may be used to supporting and overcoming. And aside from that, just like anything, kind of navigating through perceived risks and actual risks, and ultimately making sure that you have kind of a collective commitment within the team, and that comes from kind of a leadership commitment on the project as well.
Yeah, I think that leadership commitment is really vital to get those outcomes. It needs to be kind of led from the top as well as across the team, right, in general. I think you spoke a little bit to the finalizing your commitments, and I think it highlights the importance of really working closely with with the client and the project team to talk through the challenges and what you're working towards, and why things might change and what's happening with your design and things like that, because obviously there's a lot of detail that needs to go in there, and it is important to lock those things in and know what you're working towards, but also taking on board the fact that there are things that need to be worked through to get to that final point. So that's really good. Look, we are fast running out of time, and I've seen a few questions potentially pop up, so I might just stop it there and just open it up to any questions. So I'm just having a quick read here, so bear with me, everybody. So Max Fitzgerald's asked us, what date did you make rubberized and plastic roads, as we've made roads with our own specified mixes that were laid and approved by whole of Victoria and other states in Australia. We have done this for longer years. So I'm not quite sure if that one's specifically for you, Reid, around rubberized and plastic roads. Sorry, we might follow up with Max on that one separately. So just wondering if there's any other questions that have come through. Just bear with me, everyone, sorry. I don't think we have anything further. I know we are running out of time, so maybe just to wrap it up quickly before I hand back to Cheryl, Reid, any kind of words of wisdom or kind of final thoughts on the process and your project, or just any final thoughts, I guess.
I suppose be persistent and also patient, because there are a number of times when navigating through that full list of opportunities that there was a no, that's not going to work. There was some skepticism, and there is plenty of questions. But over time, as we continued to gather more information, whether it was from the market or from Ecologic and MRPV, those barriers or perceived barriers may have been overcome. So you may just need to wait a little bit if an initiative may not get across the line at this very moment. Also, I'd say do your homework, think about your supply chain now. You may be already purchasing a number of products that have recycled content and may be key contributors to your future project that has a recycle first policy within it. And I suppose it also really helps if your clients are collaborative and flexible, because as we were trying to develop some of these commitments, knowing that we had a open collaborative relationship made us a bit more comfortable in avoiding underbaking some of those commitments and actually trying to be true to the policy, just because, again, you don't know what you don't know, and there are some things that may evolve over time that you couldn't have foreseen. And so trusting that the intent is there and within your commitments, things can be worked out, but ultimately, having collaborative and flexible clients to help you navigate through this. I mean, that was a really helpful thing for us with MRPV in this new kind of PDA model we've been running with.
Okay, great. Look, I think we're out of time. So look, I just want to say a massive thank you, Reid, for taking the time to chat with us. It sounds like you're doing some really great things, and we're very eager to see how things progress on the project and beyond with the policy, obviously. So I'll just hand back to Cheryl now to wrap things up.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you, Reid. Yeah, it was another great session, so thank you very much for participating. And thank you to everyone for attending. You will be covered if you've registered today for all sessions, but we will notify you each week on the different topics. So next week on November the 12th, we've got Ecologic Senior Program Manager Leanne Griffin, and she'll be talking to Kieron Treasurer, who is the Environment and Sustainability Lead in Infrastructure at Metro Trains Melbourne. So Kieron has been heavily involved in managing the testing and approval of recycled ballast, and that's what we'll be talking about next week. So once again, we'll shoot the invitations out Monday, and if you're keen, jump in again next week. And thank you again to everyone. Our recording will go up Monday into our knowledge share. If you need access, the address is on this question sheet, and I'll just pop in the details for next week as well. Just as a reminder, we're talking about recycled ballast. And thank you again. Thank you for your time.